April 9, 1940, the dark, cold waters of the Oslofjord are pierced by the silhouettes of German warships gliding toward Norway's capital. Leading the flotilla is the brand new heavy cruiser, Blücher, bristling with guns and loaded with invasion troops. On shore, an antiquated coastal fortress stirs to life, its century-old cannons quietly training on the unwelcome guests. The Germans believe the Norwegian defences will be feeble, a grave miscalculation. Without warning, the night erupts in fire as the fortress's guns unleash devastation on the cruiser. In minutes, the new pride of Hitler's Kriegsmarine is burning and mortally wounded. Before dawn breaks, she will be on the fjord's floor, shattering Germany's hopes of a quick victory. This is the story of Blücher, the heavy cruiser sunk by a fort. Blücher was born from Germany's ambitious naval rearmament in the 1930s, a direct rebuke to the Treaty of Versailles. As the second of 5 Admiral Hipper-class heavy cruisers, she embodied the Kriegsmarine's resurgence. On paper, Blücher was to meet the 10,000-ton limit of the 1935 Anglo-German Naval Agreement, but, in reality, she far exceeded it, a treaty cruiser in name only. At full load, Blücher displaced about 18,500 tons and stretched 666 feet in length, making her a formidable presence. Her hull was clad in medium armour, up to 80mm belt and 50mm deck, enough to shrug off destroyer fire, though modest against battleship-caliber shells. Blücher's armament gave her a potent offensive punch. She carried a main battery of 8 203mm 8-inch guns in 4 twin turrets, 2 forward, 2 aft. These heavy guns could hurl high explosive shells over 30 kilometers, suitable for dueling enemy cruisers or bombarding shore targets. For anti-aircraft and secondary defense, Blücher bristled with a dozen 105mm dual-purpose guns, a dozen 37mm cannons, 8 20mm autocannons, and even a bank of torpedo tubes. 3 Arado 196 floatplanes were normally carried for reconnaissance and spotting gunfire, further extending her reach. In all, Blücher was a modern war machine, fast, well-armed, and built at enormous cost, nearly 86 million Reichsmarks, to herald Nazi Germany's naval ambitions. Yet for all her power, Blücher's design was also a product of haste and compromise. Germany's rush to rearm meant these cruisers were completed in the shadow of looming war. Blücher was laid down in August 1935 and launched in June 1937, but not commissioned until September 1939, just days after World War II began. She was named after Prussian Field Marshal Gebhard von Blücher, Napoleon's nemesis at Waterloo, a nod to German military tradition. With war underway, Blücher's role would be urgent and unforgiving. Her design made her ideal as a surface raider or task force flagship, combining speed and firepower to strike out across the seas. In the coming spring, however, this brand new cruiser would be sent not on a distant raid, but into the confined waters of a Norwegian fjord, a mission her builders likely never envisioned. In early 1940, Blücher was one of the Kriegsmarine's finest and newest ships, a symbol of naval pride that would soon face its fateful trial. Blücher's active career would prove shockingly short. After her commissioning in September 1939, the heavy cruiser spent the autumn and winter working up in the Baltic Sea, training her green crew and ironing out mechanical issues. By April 1940, Blücher was barely battle-tested. In fact, her final sea trials were only completed on April 5, 1940. Nonetheless, larger events were in motion. Germany was secretly preparing Operation Weserübung, the invasion of Denmark and Norway, and Blücher was called into action immediately. The brand new cruiser was selected as the flagship of Warship Group 5, the naval force assigned to seize Oslo, Norway's capital. It was a high honour and high-risk assignment for a ship so recently out of the shipyard. On the night of April 8, 1940, Blücher slipped out of Germany, bound for the Oslofjord, as the centrepiece of Group 5. Kapitan Heinrich Woldag commanded the ship, while on her bridge stood Konteradmiral Oskar Kummetz, the group's overall commander. Crammed aboard Blücher were hundreds of army troops and key personnel for the invasion, including Major General Erwin Engelbrecht and other officers tasked with capturing Norway's king and government. This would be Blücher's first combat operation, essentially her maiden voyage in wartime. Alongside her sailed a powerful escort, the 14,000-ton pocket battleship Lützow, formerly Deutschland, the light cruiser Emden, 3 torpedo boats, and a flotilla of minesweepers and support ships. In all, Group 5 carried over 2,000 German troops intended for a surprise landing at Oslo. The plan was audacious: race up the 100-kilometer Oslofjord under cover of darkness, neutralize any coastal defenses, and land shock troops to capture Oslo's key sites before dawn. As Blücher steamed northward into Norwegian waters, her crew went to action stations in the pre-dawn hours of April 9th. The operation's secrecy had been compromised slightly. Earlier that night, a lone Norwegian patrol boat had stumbled upon the invasion force. The little vessel, Pole 3, caught sight of Group 5 in the fog around 11 and bravely moved to challenge the intruders. Pole 3's captain, Leif Welding Olsen, managed to fire off warning flares and a shot before a German torpedo boat opened fire and rammed his ship. Welding Olsen was mortally wounded, the first Norwegian killed in World War II, but his flares alerted coastal observers to the incoming fleet. Now fully alerted, Norway's coastal batteries along the fjord prepared for action, even as Blücher and her consorts pressed on. Kummetz, aboard Blücher, ordered radio silence and for his ships to ignore any warning shots, determined to maintain surprise. The stage was set for a deadly showdown in the narrowing channel ahead. In the early hours of April 9th, 1940, Blücher led her flotilla into the Drøbak Narrows, the choke point in the Oslofjord, guarded by Oscarsborg fortress. The German charts had dismissed Oscarsborg as an old fort of little concern, practically a museum from a bygone era. The fortress was old. Its main batteries were 3 28cm, 11-inch Krupp guns installed in the 1890s, nicknamed Moses, Aaron, and Joshua. The fort's commander, 64-year-old Colonel Birger Eriksen, had a skeleton crew of recruits and a handful of aging reservists manning these guns. Ammunition was limited, and no formal war had been declared. Despite the uncertainty, Colonel Eriksen understood the dire stakes. As Blücher, a massive dark shape, approached within point-blank range in the dim pre-dawn light, he made a snap decision. Eriksen gave the order to fire without warning. "Either I will be decorated, or I will be court-martialed. Fire," he exclaimed. Oscarsborg's 2 operable 28cm guns roared to life, firing their heavy shells directly into Blücher at just 500 to 600 meters range. The first shell struck Blücher near her forward superstructure. It penetrated and detonated amidships, ripping through the cruiser's aircraft hangar and igniting stored fuel and munitions for the ship's Arado floatplanes. An orange fireball shot upward as aviation fuel, bombs, and depth charges all went up in flames. Seconds later, the second 28cm round slammed into Blücher's forward barbette, the base of a forward gun turret. The impact shattered the barbette and sprayed carnage across the deck, while also knocking out the ship's main electrical circuits. With that single hit, Blücher's primary gun batteries fell silent, their power and fire control systems crippled. In the space of moments, the proud cruiser had been severely wounded. Fires raged amidships, and her bridge was enveloped in smoke and confusion. These aging Krupp guns dated back to 1893, yet they proved devastatingly effective against a modern heavy cruiser. Manned by untested crews with minimal protection, the guns nevertheless hit their mark with deadly accuracy in the opening salvo. As Blücher reeled, the fortress brought more weapons to bear. On the eastern shore, Oscarsborg's secondary Kopos battery opened up with 3 15cm guns, while smaller 57mm guns at Husvik on the western side poured rapid fire into the cruiser's flanks. Shells spattered against Blücher's sides and superstructure. In these few frantic minutes, the ship was struck dozens of times. 13 hits from 15cm shells and around 30 hits from the rapid-fire 57mm guns. At 6:22, less than 2 hours after the first shots, Blücher capsized and sank in the Drøbak Narrows. Her bow plunged beneath the fjord's surface, and the great ship slid to the bottom, coming to rest 90 meters down. The waters of Oslofjord, frigid and now coated with fuel oil, became a nightmare for the survivors. Of the approximately 2,100 sailors, soldiers, and passengers on board Blücher, 650 to 800 lost their lives in the sinking. Hundreds died in the water itself. Many were killed or badly burned when the thick fuel oil leaking from the ship ignited atop the water. Others were overcome by hypothermia in the 6 degrees Celsius fjord. Still, a remarkable number survived. Roughly 1,400 Germans made it to shore or were pulled from the water alive. On nearby islands and beaches, groups of soaked, shocked survivors gathered. Norwegian units, including elements of the King's Guard, took several hundred of them prisoner, at least temporarily. Blücher's high-profile passengers, General Engelbrecht, Admiral Kummetz, and others, also survived the ordeal, coming ashore among the throngs of stunned men. Due to the rapid collapse of Norwegian defences in the area later that day, most of these prisoners, including the Admiral and General, were effectively freed within hours and continued the advance toward Oslo. For the Germans, the loss of Blücher was an enormous shock, and it threw their invasion plan into disarray. With their flagship burning and sinking, the remaining ships of Group 5 aborted the direct assault on Oslo. The heavy cruiser, Lutzow, and the others, unaware of the hidden torpedo battery, assumed Blücher had struck mines in the Narrows and immediately retreated downfjord out of range. Instead of barging through to the capital, they would have to put their troops ashore south of Oslo and advance over land. This crucial delay upended the German timetable. Oslo did not fall in the early morning as planned, but only later after ground fighting, by which time the key targets had slipped away. Thanks to Blücher's stand at Oscarsborg, King Haakon VII, the Norwegian royal family, the cabinet, and members of parliament all managed to evacuate Oslo in the nick of time. They fled north with Norway's national gold reserves in tow, denying the invaders their primary objective of a quick capitulation. In essence, a few antiquated guns and torpedoes at Oscarsborg Fortress, for one critical day, halted an entire German task force and altered the course of the campaign. The immediate aftermath saw the Germans react with furious reprisal. Later on April 9th, waves of Luftwaffe bombers and Stuka dive bombers descended upon Oscarsborg Fortress, pounding the old fortification for hours. By then, however, the fortress had done its duty. Colonel Eriksson and his outgunned garrison had slain a giant at the fjord's doorstep and bought Norway precious time. The Battle of Drøbak Sound, the Oslofjord ambush, thus ended as a stunning Norwegian defensive victory. It marked one of World War II's first great naval surprises, shattering the invincibility of Germany's seaborne invasion force at the very outset of the campaign. The sinking of Blücher had consequences far beyond the loss of a single ship. It was the decisive event that delayed the fall of Oslo and gave King Haakon VII, the royal family, and the Norwegian government the vital hours needed to escape north with the nation's gold reserves. Unlike Denmark, which capitulated the same day, Norway's leaders remained free, enabling organised resistance at home and a government in exile abroad. For Germany, the disaster was an unexpected humiliation. Blücher had been one of the newest and most modern ships in the Kriegsmarine, yet she had been destroyed within minutes by antiquated coastal guns and decades-old torpedoes. The wreck in Oslofjord became an immediate warning to the German Navy about the dangers of underestimating fixed defences and the risks of forcing narrow waters. The Luftwaffe's retaliatory bombardment of Oscarsborg Fortress later that day destroyed many of its guns, but the damage to the invasion timetable had already been done. For the Germans, it was a painful reminder of the price of haste. For the Norwegians, the destruction of Blücher quickly assumed a symbolic role, proof that even a small, undermanned fortress could strike a decisive blow. Though Norway would ultimately be occupied, the memory of that morning at Drøbak Sound became a symbol of resistance and a source of pride in an otherwise dark campaign.